Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. I've done it properly this time, and hopefully you can see me and hear me, and your questions are totally welcome. So welcome everyone. I'll just wait for people to jump on, and just as I was setting up for this stream, I've knocked over my plant. There's dirt all over the floor. I've smashed the bulb in my. I don't know if I should get this out again. I tried to move this salt lamp and I smashed the bulb in it. I like sitting here with my little salt lamp. But anyway, stream will go on. So I'll clean all that up afterwards. But I thought I would talk about today about health is more than disease, and as in the absence of disease. And health is in your hands. Health has always been in your hands. And it's a big part of how Chinese medicine thinks about things. And I know that's what attracts a lot of people to this channel, is to be able to talk about. I'm just going to make sure the audio is up high enough so I can push that up a little, not right in my face. So if you just joined the stream, your questions are welcome. You can have any questions you like. I may or may not answer them, but questions about Chinese medicine, particularly if you're a student of Chinese medicine or you're thinking about becoming a student. I've had a lot of people wanting to ask questions about that kind of stuff. We're streaming this to Twitch. We're streaming this to Facebook Live and also to YouTube. So welcome everyone. So we're going to talk about health being more than a disease, and how to take that control, because I think that's part of the things that have happened in the world in the last couple of years with, since February last year, let's say. It's highlighted that for people more and more. And a lot of people, I don't know about in your country, but a lot of people looking for the government to say something about that, and they're not. And you're like, oh, we just, especially in Australia, everyone's just like, oh, waiting for the vaccine to kind of save the day. Well, even if there wasn't one, or even in that time where you were waiting for one, and I know there's a lot of people in Australia that want one that can't get it because they're not eligible yet, or there's all these problems with the rollout and the slowness and all that. What can you do in the meantime? What can you do to be in control of your health? There's lots of things you can do, and there's lots of things you probably already are doing. I know I'm sort of preaching to the converted here, but there's people that it's also a minefield of what do I do? And one of the things I love about Chinese medicine is it's so simple. And the things that are super complicated, if we can bring them back to that simplicity, you can't dismiss that. Sometimes I give people answers to their questions, and the questions are really like complex questions, and the answer can be quite simple. And sometimes it's because in a consult one-on-one, there might be more we can know because we can discuss more in that way. But there's also more that we can do for people that is just like, it's almost like this is just the basic of living that people are missing out on, or that they're not doing. So if you have a question, feel free to ask it. Hopefully I don't do anything crazy today. I've just smashed something before I started this stream, but I was going to light an incense just to calm myself, but I didn't even need to calm myself, just because I wanted to light an incense. And then I've knocked this plant over in the background and spilt dirt all over the floor and whatnot. So I was just going to light up this little incense while I was waiting for people to jump on and ask their questions. So one of the things you can think about, and that's why I was thinking about this incense, is like the connection of your mind and your body. And I did a stream not last night, the night before. I'll try to do another one at that time. It was like 10 p.m. till midnight my time. And so a lot of people in the US are around at that time. And there's lots of people on this channel that are in the US. This is really nice incense. It's a white plum. It's a Japanese one. The Japanese incense is very fine. You can kind of see how thin it is. And so beautiful. So fine. And like, I like incense in a way, and scents, because it can help with mindfulness. It can help to bring you back to that sense of being. If people are just joining in and you can't hear me, would you let me know? Because normally I think the audio is right. I can see all that, but if there's any troubles to hear me, let me know. So yeah, it's important to have stuff in your life. It might not be a stick of incense. It might be something that you have, like practices that you have and things that you do to allow yourself to come back to the present moment, and also to be in that state of flow where you're not holding on to stuff that's detrimental to you, because you can do a lot of stuff for your physical health. I know lots of people spend heaps of money on, let's see if I can put this in, put it somewhere. I'll just put it like that. I've got my little incense tray thing here, which the scissors on that, but this is where the dirt fell. Dirt from the plant fell in. So it's just a big pile of dirt, but there's all these different experimental incenses that I have in here from different things. And this is an old, from an old scale that I have. It's like an ornament thing. And I just clean this out. Usually it's not like this because it's not full of dirt from the plant, but I'll usually use that to burn my incenses on there. It's a nice big dish. We'll just see what happens there. That'll hopefully be good. Yeah, so you can ask your questions. But it's really important to think about that connectivity and just to not dismiss that, because you can spend a lot of money and time on foods and even on treatments for things. And it's the same as with treatments and then not doing anything for your food or your health in your own self. I don't say to patients, oh, you can't come in, I won't help you. But if people do want to help those aspects, it will speed things along in general, or stop those illnesses kind of coming back as quickly, right? And it's hard to make a claim like that as a therapeutic claim, because it's really hard to get research to prove that, and that's what Western medicine kind of needs to kind of prove that. So I can understand on one hand why they don't say, oh, everyone lose weight and you won't get coronavirus or something like that, because how would you know? One is we've only just had the coronavirus, so we don't know. But so those kinds of studies, and also those things are so subjective. There can be lots of factors in the mix, right? So anyway, I thought I would jump on here and do a stream. If there's anyone who wants to ask a question, you're welcome to ask them. Foods as medicine. I want to talk about that a little bit, and how it's kind of a multifaceted approach and what you can do for yourself. And I just think there's a lot of, I don't know what you listen to in the world, but I listen to a lot of news on YouTube, and there's a lot of distressing information that can come your way. And it's good to be informed and be aware. But how do you balance that between being informed and aware and being all riled up? And, and at the end of the day, I like to think if there's something we can do, then you're more likely to not be distressed by it, right? So if there's some kind of action there. So growing your own food is a good place to start. I think now more than ever, if you're not doing some of that. Now I have little pot plants. I'm not the greatest gardener. And what I just started doing last year was just throwing my seeds into the ground, like the seeds that I would eat. Like, so if I had tomato, I'll throw the seeds in the ground. If I had a capsicum, I'll throw the seeds in the ground. Just doing that has grown some food. Now, I'm not running a food market or anything like that, but it's a start. It's somewhere to start. And yeah, okay, you might not be able to survive the apocalypse on the one capsicum that's grown up in, once a month and get a capsicum out of the garden or something. But it's a way to start. It's a way to start thinking about that. And then you can start getting involved in community gardens if you don't have a place to grow things yourself. Or you can start, in Australia, we have these verge programs where you can grow your garden on the verge. And there can be lots of ways to kind of do that. I had a patient that used to come and see me regularly, and he had a little plot of land in a community garden. And what he would do is they just give you that plot of land, and you have to go in and tend to it yourself. You grow what you want there and you pick it. And then that he might grow parsnips and turnips and things like that. And then other people grows carrots and other things, and they swap around with what they've got. And it's a good community thing for you to do. Now, I get that if you're working 40 hours a week, you're not going to spend your remaining 2 hours a day before it gets dark to go and tend to your community garden. But you might be able to do something like this at your workplace. Like you can do things. You can do stuff on the roof. Now that a lot of people are working from home, there's just so many different ways that you can kind of start to do that. So I just didn't realize I haven't had that on. But if people have comments, you're welcome to ask them, and I'll try to answer them. So maybe you're a student of Chinese medicine. Maybe you're just a curious person. Maybe you've never had acupuncture before. and you're just interested to learn about it. So I know quite a few of my peeps are in the eastern states, Sydney, Melbourne, that kind of thing. So I thought I would jump on and do something for those people as well. Might answer some other questions we've got here. I just really feel right now that there's quite a bit of stress in the world. I mean, that's not just been right now, but I think there's ways in Chinese medicine that you can empower yourself. And who cares if these terrible things that you think might happen eventuate or don't eventuate, like, you know, worldwide catastrophes and global things going on and that sort of stuff. If that doesn't eventuate, if things you're putting in place are still healthy for you anyway, that's a good place to start. That's a good place to be at. You know, I've seen lots of people say, oh, there's going to be food shortages and you need to start, you know, collecting up water and storable foods and all this kind of stuff. And I, on one hand, I don't know how I feel about that in the Chinese medicine way, because it's not a good, that's not a healthy way to live on storable food. Now, it's better than having no food at all. But we need to kind of think about things more sustainably, like if you could grow your food yourself. That's why I'm saying growing it is better. Now, you might not have a house to live in if everything went to pots. So you're one of these people in a bunker car and you're driving around to, you know, I don't know if that's a thing that's going to happen, but I've seen people with these prepper cars. Like, there's not that many in Australia, but when this virus thing first happened, the news went out to this little family that had one, because there's not many people, especially where I live in Perth. And so these are like, you know, an anomaly. And these guys were like, it's our time to shine. Like, we're ready. We're ready for it. And they had everything in there. They had this van, like fully prepped, everything. You know, the tarp tent over the top of this kind of army looking van with everything in there, sleeping gear, you know, ways to make food and water and all this sort of stuff. So I'm not dismissing that at all. Like, I think that's quite smart. And like, but it was just interesting that they were sort of like, yes, this is the moment we've been waiting for, you know. And if you're prepping for that sort of stuff, you probably hope that it doesn't eventuate, but even though you're ready for it. So yeah, so what can you do? I think it's good to focus on those kinds of things. Like, what can you do to help yourself? What can you do to maintain your health, and just being able to take incremental small steps towards that. Don't know if this is a bit too close. My little incense has gone a bit close to us. It's a plum blossom kind of smell. So yeah, that's what I thought I'd talk about today, is how to be healthy. And if you have a question about that, and you have a question, sometimes it takes people a while to get on the stream. And also, this might not be a great time for people. I think people are sleeping in the US, probably. Hopefully you can hear me properly. If there's any trouble hearing me, better tell me. Just move the mic a bit closer, because I'm not so bombastic today. I'm not yelling and screaming. Not that I yell and scream, but I'm not as loud as I normally would be. So the other part of what I wanted to think about, what I was thinking about, and feel free to ask your questions if you want to, and I'll get to that as well, is there's more than one system of health, of medicine in the world. And what we're seeing now is kind of this push towards, well, that is the only way. That's the only system. One of the things I studied as part of my study was I did a degree in international health, and that was at Curtin University. And that was really, like, it's for people who wanted to either work with the UN, for the UN, or the WHO, or people who want to do research. That wasn't my intention to kind of get a job with the WHO or anything like that. But I wanted to get a degree in research so I could do my teaching of Chinese medicine, because I could sort of see these changes coming and preempted that I'd need this degree or need a higher degree. So I did a Master's of International Health. And what you learn in that is actually a lot of different systems of medicine and how they interact in cultures, right? So how cultures are about, how that's important. Just seen some more people jump on the stream. So feel free to answer, or you can answer your own question. Feel free to ask a question if you have a question. This is what this stream's for. So, but I'm just talking about how I did my study in international health and how there's more than one system of medicine out there. And it was very obvious to me because I was really into Chinese medicine. I studied that straight out of high school, and I'd been practicing that for about maybe 2 years before I went into this degree in international health. And the reason why I chose that as well is because they were very embracing of me looking at how Chinese medicine was utilized in different cultures, particularly in China, for instance. But then as part of it, you also look at how different cultures have medical systems within them, like traditional medical systems. And there was very much a kind of a push to embrace those medical systems, not to just push Western medicine on these poor people and to dismiss their culture, right? Because their medicine is part of their culture. And it's not just their culture, but it's their understanding of thinking. Now, sometimes you come across a thing where there's a particular culture, and within that culture, there's a way of thinking that's detrimental to health. And that's where you want to bring this new knowledge and say, hey, stop doing this because that's a dirty habit, or that's going to cause you detriment. But there's a reason why people do those things. And if we don't embrace that or think about that, or you can't just go in and tell, because these people don't necessarily listen. I'll give you a couple of really interesting examples. So one of my colleagues in Curtin Uni was doing his thesis, his master's degree, on the rise or the incidence of HIV in Myanmar. It used to be called Burma. And one of the things, I think he was doing St. Petersburg, but hey, teacup, awesome. Feel free to ask your questions. I'm sure you've got lots of questions there to ask. I hope you're doing all right over there you're in the eastern states, right? It's not a good time right now for you guys. I'm sure it's a horrible situation. So in Myanmar, I'm not sure if he had his degree. Anyway, I remember him doing his talk, and he'd mentioned these different, how HIV was perceived in different cultures. And get this, so in Myanmar, one of the things that men believe as a cultural belief is, if I sleep with a virgin, it will cure me of HIV. Right? So you can see how that's not going to be good for public health, and how that's just going to continuously spread the disease. But people believe that for a reason, right? They have that belief for a reason. How did it come about and all that? And that was really interesting to me to kind of think about, how did these beliefs come about? Now, that's not a system of medicine, going around sleeping with virgins to cure yourself of HIV. But another really interesting one was in India. They have these houses with a cowshed under the house. So if you think about, they had this sort of, it was in a research paper that I'd read this, but these are really interesting research papers to read, because they're actually interesting. So I'll draw this little thing. So they have these houses like this, right? And here's the door and whatever. There's your house, and this is like a on stilts kind of thing. So I'll see if you can see that, right? I didn't get a job at play school, so you can see. But underneath here, so this would be stilts and like a kind of a staircase going up to the house. They have this thing called a cowshed under the house. Now, why do they have that? Because one is that you have that saying, right? In India, there's probably some Indian people watching now. So if you can tell me that's true, right? That it's not just the sacred cow, as in, okay, cows are sacred for religious uses, but every family had a cow so that they could get milk, so they could live. And this cow lived in this cowshed. Now, it's basically like like baby Jesus being born in a manger. It's a manger kind of thing. That's what a manger is. It's a shed which is filled with hay and probably lots of feces from that animal living in there. And what they would do in this culture is, when women would give birth, it was culturally appropriate or not appropriate for them to give birth in anywhere in the house, because it was unclean. Well, it is an unclean. That's not it was, but this is their beliefs probably still now, like culturally. And so these researchers were saying they were like trying to reduce maternal mortality rate, which is women dying from the process of giving birth. So as you give birth, if you're giving birth in a dirty old cowshed, that's what they would do. So they found that was the prominent, the major way people gave birth was to go into this cowshed and do it in there, because it's an unclean thing. So the cultural premise is, well, this practice of giving birth is unclean and we can't have this in our house. What was interesting when the researchers were like saying, how do we solve this? How do we, because if we just basically intervened here, we wouldn't need, all this infection control after, you wouldn't need to give these women antibiotics and have that. And I mean, on top of that, these people are giving birth and they're obviously not in a hospital, but they're not necessarily having postnatal checkups and care and things like that. And so they get an infection there, or they might have an infection might go up into their uterus from, lying in feces or being in that environment and all that sort of stuff. So one of the things that they found was it wasn't the women's choice, or they weren't empowered to make that choice. It was not the man in the family. It was actually the mother-in-law that had the ability to make that decision. So there's no point in the people who want to make that change and say, hey, we want to help you, or we notice that you have a high maternal mortality rate. We want to come in and help you lower that. So let's put a hospital here so that when people have an infection, there's somewhere for you to come. That might not be what's needed to happen. What was needed to happen was what would make a bigger difference was to somehow convince the person that was not the best practice for them, that could be making them sick. Like, just bring that knowledge to their awareness. But then you could do that to the women, but then if they're not empowered to do anything, they're just going to feel bad about it and not be able to change, because who's in charge? The mother-in-law's in charge. So what I'm getting at is there's like, even in the university system, they're embracing these other systems of medicine. They're thinking about how these things work. I mean, that's not really a system of medicine. They're just like cultural beliefs. But they're two things that I remember reading, and I thought, well, that really sort of stuck out to me, those things. Also thinking about how mental illness is seen in other cultures. Like, there was a study that I read about Papua New Guinea and this illness, which is very similar to what we would consider like either somewhere between schizophrenia and like bipolar, where someone's having a manic episode. And in this like tribal area, they called it tsutso, which is like possession, demon possession. And they had this process of people going through this like ritual healing, where a shaman would do stuff on them. They'd go into this little tent, they would have all this stuff, and that would be a process and a ritual. Like, the society where they live would basically determine, you need help, you're going to go and see this person. This person's going to help you. There's a belief there that this person's going to help them. It's all a mental condition, right? Now, it doesn't mean it's necessarily all in their head, because it's physiological stuff that's going on. And that's how Western medicine treats it, right? Physical. They're like, oh, we need to give you drugs to fix the physical. Now, in Western medicine now, in psychiatry, there's a lot more emphasis on not just the physical. They have emphasis on the mental too. Like, let's give people cognitive behavioral therapy, go and see a psychologist, or talk to a psychiatrist and talk about those things and change your mindset and all this sort of stuff. But in this culture, all they did was literally, it's all a belief, right? The person believed they were going to be healed or fixed from this thing, and they went through this ritual, and then they were free from it. And the researchers that are doing this is like what's called like a qualitative research, and the researcher has this idea. They want to see how this society functions with this particular illness, or how they deal with something. And so they go in almost like either undercover. Now, sometimes it's hard if you're going into a tribal area and you just stick out because you're obviously not from that tribal area, but you gain the respect of those people, and you live with them for a period of time so that you can gather that knowledge, and that those people are more open and willing to share that knowledge because they trust you, right? You're not doing any interventions. You're just gathering the knowledge, and you're just doing that. And then they write these papers. And so that's what this social science researcher was saying. He was just reporting on what had happened. He said, look, isn't it interesting? He goes, all these symptoms that he's observing as a researcher, these symptoms in the West, we would call it this. But in this tribe, they call it tsutso, they call it this, and they had different differentiations for different things as well. It's just really interesting, right? There are many, many, many systems of medicine. Why has Western medicine been sort of chosen as the only system for everything. I'm not saying like random tribal medicines could fix things that, you know, there's not a place for every medicine to fix everything or to be used in everything. But it's just something interesting to consider. And there's gaps. There's so many gaps in Western medicine as well, right? Now, I'm not against it. I'm not against Western medicine. Oh, I hate you. It's a great system for certain things, but it's not a system that's designed to keep you healthy. It's not a system that's designed to propagate health. It's a system that's designed to help someone when they're sick, right? To treat someone when they're sick. So good afternoon, Teacup. I'd love to hear a question from you if you have something to ask. Otherwise, I'll just be rambling on about whatever I want to ramble on about. So I'm sure people have questions. I'm sure you have. Then don't be shy. There's no judgment here. If you ask a question that's been asked before, that's fine. Or you want to talk about something else. So I guess that idea that there's different systems of medicine, and to be, I think the world should be more open to that. And then you think, well, there's no money in, one thing we were talking about in the stream on two days ago was, you know, someone asked about what's the importance of meditation and mindfulness or Taoist breathing practices and things like that. And I said they kind of got a little whiteboard thing here somewhere. I've got all these little things that I've made. So they kind of go into these aspects. So you have diet, Tai Chi, Qigong, Tuina, herbs, acupuncture. They're what's the 5 branches. Now, there are different systems where they say there's 8 branches of Chinese medicine, but just roughly, let's say these 2 things, it's not certainly in a pharmaceutical way. I mean, even in a pharmaceutical way, you can't really make money out of these things. So it's not all about money, for sure, because otherwise I wouldn't be, doing this stream. I wouldn't be doing Chinese medicine. But that's what medicine has unfortunately become about. I don't think the average doctor, I mean, some doctors maybe, but that's not necessarily what it's about for them. Like, there are people in medicine, people in Western medicine that are good doctors that love helping people. And even if they don't really care so much about the person, like they might not seem like a doctor that's loving you and care, you know, I mean, you don't want a doctor that's loving you like a sexual way or anything, but you know, they might not seem like they genuinely care, but a lot of doctors genuinely want to solve the problem that's wrong with you, right? They want to fix the thing that's wrong. They want that, it's like a puzzle they want to solve. And they genuinely care about society and humanity. You know, there's lots of doctors that do that. And then obviously in every profession, you've got good and bad. You've got, you know, in Chinese medicine, you've got people that are supposedly just there for the money and the glory as well. But what I'm getting at is the system is part of the whole as well, right? So within every system, within everything, like, and this is what's become, I think this is what is a problem that's becoming in Chinese medicine, particularly in Australia, because of our governance. You have like your individual practitioners, let's say, but they're all part, and they have to function within that system, right? So here's all, you know, all these different doctors, and then here's the system, and then the system also has to function within the government. And so this is kind of, you know, making sure that things are safe, making sure that people aren't charging too much money, let's say, for something. And I know it's very different in the US because that system has different governances. Like there's a lot more allowance for freer trade. And so within that you have the extortion can take place within that, right? But there also has to be some governance so that, well, what if you do go to a practitioner and they treat you badly, like they don't do the right treatment on you, or they give you really terrible advice or malpractice, they've hurt you or something like that. So that's where those individual practitioners have to function within that system. So what's a problem in Australia is the system. It's only about safety, and within our system, we don't have. There's, I know this is probably the same with Chinese medicine in other countries as well. There's just so many styles, and people can't agree on just to be friends. In some ways, there's a lot of fighting, and all that energy and effort that's kind of took up on fighting. Okay, thanks, Teacup. Oh, and there's someone else asked a question. That's good. I'll get off this ramble. But I wish there wasn't as much fighting, and I can understand why there is on some ways, but all that energy that's taken up on the fighting could be spent on something else, or everyone could come together and we could achieve something better for our profession. That's what I hope, because in the core of my heart, I love Chinese medicine. I love that system I think it's a great system of healing. It's a great system of health maintenance, like helping people stay healthy. And that's something that Western medicine doesn't have. They don't have that as the core of their system. Now, there's some doctors that are about that, and that's great, and they should be about that. But in general, they're not kind of about that. Someone's asked me, my friend's asked me, what's tangerine? Chen P. Okay. Yeah. So Teacup, fear misting the mind. Yeah, all the fighting. Yeah, for sure. It takes up energy, and it takes up it takes up resource, and that resource could be given to other things. It could be given to your practice as a practitioner. And for some people, they need support in their practice. Well, I think we all could do with support, and it would be great if our profession kind of supported us. All right, great. Dan, I'll talk about this instead. Hi, I took your advice from one of your videos that suggested cooking the majority of your food, and it seemed to help balance out a few gut issues I had. Thanks. Oh, that's great. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was saying at the start of this video. I'll put that on there in case people are watching and they're not sure what we're talking about. Is that oftentimes it's the very simple things that make a big difference, and you can't just dismiss those super simple things. And it's just such a great place to start. And that doesn't help you if you've already been eating cooked foods for years and years, and you're like, oh, my gut's not great. Well, you can't obviously start doing that if you've already been doing that. But yeah, that's great to know. And then over time, you can kind of be more and more aware of what foods are kind of doing different things. So yeah, that's good. If anyone has other questions, please feel free to ask them. So I just think people should be more aware that there are different systems of medicine in the world. There's not just one system. And when the coronavirus first happened this time last year, or whenever it was, February last year, there wasn't any embracing of Chinese medicine at all anywhere in the world. It was very much dismissed. Even in China, I was really surprised, because when the first SARS happened, like some people called coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, it's this type of SARS virus. One of my colleagues was in China doing his internship when that happened. And, it was kind of downplayed through the world. Thank God we didn't have a pandemic then, because we would have had this situation back then. It would have been terrible. I'm not saying, it's good that it was downplayed because it wasn't as bad. But in China, it was quite bad. And especially in the hospital he was in, they were treating lots of patients with that. And they use Chinese and Western medicine together there in a very different way to how we would use Chinese medicine in the West. So an example of stuff that they do in China very commonly is they'll put Chinese herbs in IV fluids, right? So they'll make up these, like a herbal decoction, I guess, make it sterile somehow, and then put it in people's arms as an IV. I'm not sure if that's what they were doing so much for SARS-1, like SARS, but that's common. I've seen them do that a lot. They use injectable herbs or injectable vitamins into acupuncture points. We don't really do that a lot in the West. I have done that in my practice from time to time, but it's not something I commonly do now. What else do they do that's different? And how they integrate Chinese and Western medicine together, right? So let's say a patient comes in and they're really sick. And like a stroke would be a good example, because there's sort of a protocol that they'll have in Western medicine. I think they use that for like the first week, and then they get them straight on to the Chinese medicine. So much more the acupuncture, and they get them straight into acupuncture straight away. So there's a lot of there's a big difference in someone who's had a stroke who starts the treatment straight away versus someone who's already got what they call stroke sequelae, which is like hemiplegia, paralysis, or difficulty speaking or something like that. And that's already taken place. Now, the problem in a research setting is if you treat everyone before those symptoms take place, you can't really say you stopped the symptoms, because no symptoms took place necessarily. Or does that make sense? Like, some people who have a stroke don't get those stroke sequelae, or they get it and they recover by themselves, or they recover with other methods by themselves. Like, they might recover, just time will heal that paralysis, right? Or it recovers slowly, and some people's symptoms, the residual symptoms are very mild. So if you're giving everyone acupuncture at the start, well, you could have just, how do you know that all those people wouldn't have just automatically had mild symptoms? It's not impossible to prove that, because you could have two groups of people, and you could just show, like, on a time basis, let's say 100 people who had a stroke, this is the percentage of people who, in a year from that had these sequelae symptoms at this severity and blah, blah, blah. And let's say in the acupuncture treatment group, they had less. And I'm sure that that takes place in China, those kinds of studies. But one of the issues we have here, one of the biggest issues, is most of these studies that are done for Chinese medicine come out of China, which makes sense because they're using it like that in China, in the hospitals. But APRA, the governing body, kind of issued this statement like a year or 2 years ago, saying we're not accepting any studies from China, like blanketly, which I find to be bizarre, because it's sort of a bit racist in a way, like to say, oh, one country, everything's bad, and it's Chinese medicine. But they were, on one hand, I can understand, because they were saying, well, there's too much corruption in that system, and so they're acknowledging that, right? They're acknowledging that they govern things over and they make things look good for a reason, and that they don't have the ethical standards in an academia sense that other universities in the West might have, or other places, right? Because it might have another agenda. However, I've talked to people in different industries, like engineering industries and things like that, and they said, oh, we don't have anything like that within our industry. We haven't been told we can't accept, like, blanketly, oh, everything from China is bad. Like, there's lots of industries, that use data from China. So it's just something you'd have to, if you're a practitioner and you want to use those studies, in the end, if you use them and they complain to you, like APRA complains to you, then you'll have to have it out with APRA, which is a possibility. You can always do. Teacup says, that's amazing. Is there emergency treatment? Emergency treatment for stroke? Yes. Yeah, I could talk for hours about what they do in China. That's quite interesting. There's a really good book. Let me see if oh yeah, there it is. I love having all my books just right here. I'll do these streams. This is a good book if you're interested in what goes on in China. This is an older book now. It's called, where are we? Plurality and Synthesis by Volker. He's a really well-known author in Chinese medicine. And this is just really a good read about Chinese medicine. It talks about the history of lots of things in Chinese medicine, but particularly how it's like this merging of acupuncture and herbs within the Western medicine system has taken place. And that was one of the biggest shocks I had. Now, this was back in 2001 when I did my internship there. And I went back in 2005 when I was doing my master's degree, and I did a little bit more observation in a hospital and did some research, like asking doctors, like getting to fill out my questionnaire, and qualitative research with doctors there to gather data for my master's degree project. But then since then, I haven't needed, I started doing my classical Chinese medicine course, and I before that I wasn't really, I guess I I didn't feel that I was learning anything just from going to hospitals in China. Like, it's really interesting and you're like, wow, this is amazing. But what you can actually take home and learn and practice on your patients depends on the teacher that you have. So there's lots of great teachers in China for sure. Absolutely. But what they actually are doing there is almost so ingrained in Western medicine now that it's hard to separate the two out. Like, for instance, patients would come in to the herbs department and I would be observing there. So what you're doing in that department is you're just looking at people that have internal medicine. So they call it NACUR, right? So if they had gut problems or maybe headaches, or maybe headaches might even go to an acupuncture department, that kind of stuff, right? So they would just take that off there. They would come into that department and then they'd subdivide those NACUR things into like gynecology and dermatology, and so like women's diseases and men's diseases, and even some hospitals, like in China, they have some hospitals just for hepatitis, like a whole hospital, like the Guangzhou hepatitis hospital. Like, does that many people have hepatitis here? But that's because they have a huge population and they can just have these special areas, right? And they're either a Western medicine hospital, a Shiyi hospital, they're either a Zhongyao hospital, Chinese herbs hospital, or Zhongyi Chinese medicine hospital, or mixed together, right? And if they are Chinese medicine, they usually mix with Western medicine anyway, just naturally. And so I'll get onto these other questions in a second. These people would come in and they'd be like, oh, the doctor would be like, oh, this guy's got Parkinson's or whatever, and he's taking these drugs and this kind of stuff, and now we're giving him these herbs. And they would check pulses and stuff, but they weren't doing purely TCM. So I wonder how that influences. For one thing, I wonder how practitioners get on when they come here. Like, I've had colleagues and teachers and stuff that, you know, in China they would have had the license to practice so much more than what they could practice here. Like, they can give out drugs, and they know about all these drug interactions and drug things, and they use Chinese herbs intermingled in that way. But then if you're not just practicing Chinese herbs, how good are you at the herbs? That's what you kind of want to think about. And that's one reason why I went into classical Chinese medicine, because I'd found a teacher's system, my teacher's system. I found a teacher that could make sense of that all so eloquently. And yeah, my life has changed. All right. What do the Chinese have to say on fasting for a prolonged period of time to detox? For example, a 3-day juice or water fast. Yep. It's a really interesting question. So in general, I want to say a few things on that. You'll see a lot of books that dismiss fasting in Chinese medicine, right? They'll say, oh, no, that's bad. Or lots of Chinese medicine teachers say that's bad. In general, your stomach likes regularity. So stopping and starting something isn't great. I think this whole intermittent fasting thing that people have going on, where they sometimes say, oh, I don't eat anything from 6 p.m. until 9 a.m. Like, that's probably normal. It's what we should be doing. It's not really fasting. It's just that would be healthy in Chinese medicine. It's giving your digestive system a break and not eating all night long. It's only because of Western civilization, let's say, and, electricity and having fridges and having, I don't know, you can drive through a McDonald's drive through at 2 a.m. if you really want something, right? And Uber Eats can come to your door and all this sort of stuff. So that has created all of these habits, and also people eating too late at night and all that sort of stuff, right? So that's definitely good. One way to think of how you benefit your stomach, right, is to empty it. Is it to be emptied. So you're putting more strain on your stomach to put food in it. Your digestive system, like in Chinese medicine, you have 2 types of organs. You have your solid organs, or your zang organs, and you have the fu organs, or the empty organs, or the hollow organs. They're like a tube. So your stomach starts, kind of here, like you could think of your throat as kind of starting the stomach, right, your esophagus. And then it's one big tube that kind of goes all the way down into the bowels, right? So how do you benefit that? It's to empty it. So to answer your question, Dan, I think there can be some cases where this is beneficial, and that's why people feel benefit from it, because they had so much food in their stomach. They were eating too much in general. Now, if you fast for long periods of time, your stomach and your intestines atrophy, right? They shrink, particularly your stomach. I don't think that's beneficial to you to have such a tiny stomach, to have your stomach atrophy like that. That might not be beneficial. So for prolonged periods of time, like as in 21-day fast, 40-day fast, those kinds of things, I don't think that's super beneficial to your system. And certainly it depends on what you're considering a fast, right? So sometimes people say, oh, I'm fasting, but I can still have juice or I can still have soup. That's different to just nothing at all. Whatever you do, your body likes that regularity. So I think if you've got a lot of blockage, like there are herbal methods that are used to purge and open. And sometimes when you're taking those herbs, you just don't feel that hungry. Like a good example of a formula is called a Xie Xin Tang, Ban Sha Xie Xin Tang or Gun Chao Xie Xin Tang, the two variations of that formula. And when I've taken that as a granules, right, which is just like the herbs that, because it says tongue, it should be made as a boiling up formula, which is like, would give you this 2 cups of, like 2 big cups of, full cups of liquid to drink, right, twice through that day. And some, depending on how you make that formula, it might end up being 3 cups. So that's happened to me before. So once I had this skin thing, right, where my skin was all like red and crazy from bed bugs. I'd gone to Sydney and for a course actually, and I'd been in this Airbnb, and it wasn't until I come home and I woke up and I was like scratching like crazy, and like my whole skin was flared up with this horrible thing. It was intense and it was horrible, and it was like hives all over me. But I think I'd had it was bed bugs. So that's the formula that I'd used. I'd used this Gun Chao Xie Xin Tang. It's like a flushing out. So what's happening is you've got this heat. In Chinese medicine, we'd say heat in that yang ming. And so then this flushing out formula. Now, because it was so acute, like it just happened, the quickest way to treat that is with these old buddies up here, the raw herbs, the bulk herbs. So you've got to make that, and that flushing out made me feel like I wasn't hungry at all. So I remember taking this formula and just feeling like I don't even feel, maybe it's because I just felt full from the herbs, or I was just like, but that kind of a formula is a purging formula. And if you're doing that with your herbs, it makes sense that your diet would sort of follow along with that in a way. Like you wouldn't be eating big meals, rich meals. And so fasting in that, maybe not fasting, but just having less food. So that would be one thing. Now, if you go into a juice fast, you have to be careful that you're not having a lot of sugar. If you're not overweight, then that might be okay. But sometimes if you have nothing in your stomach and then you just put juice, which is very sugary juice, like I don't know, because just some people have apple juice or whatever juice they want. So when you say juice fast, it might be things like, I certainly wouldn't be having raw kale. Be careful about that. It can be really toxic, raw kale. But like people have spinach and beetroot and different kinds of stuff like that. So it's kind of more of a foodie sort of thing. The detriment in Chinese medicine for that would be, well, that's all raw. So if you really want to have this kind of detox, I would go onto a 3-day soup diet. Just take what you'd make in the juice, cook it up as a soup, and just make it like a watery soup and just have that, like, or even a bone broth, have the bone broth for like 3 days instead of food, if you really want to kind of do that. So yeah, hopefully that's useful and helpful and interesting somewhat. Thanks, Dan, for asking that. If anyone else has other questions, you're welcome to ask them for sure. So yeah, exactly right. So if you're eating foods, if you're eating, like, I mean, that's sometimes people's that's sometimes people's diet. That's the majority of the time they eat is between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. and shouldn't be what's happening. I'm guilty of that too from time to time, Awesome. Okay, that's good, Dan. Yep. And so the other book you could use to help you along with that sort of story is, where is it? Might not be. It's on the other side of the room. The Healing with Whole Foods by Paul Pitchford. He has various fasts in there, like different types of fasting. He's a little bit more along the macrobiotics line, so he kind of maybe prefers or doesn't mind a bit of cold and raw food. And again, it just depends on how strong your spleen and stomach is. But if you really want to follow Chinese medicine and you want to be healthy, we would never recommend raw foods as the main diet. In Australia, there are very clear and safe treatment protocols that practitioners like you can use on both children. Are there very clear and safe treatment protocols that practitioners like you can use on children, both acupuncture and herbs? So what I was saying about APRA and safety is they don't, thank goodness they don't do this, because it would get very, very messy. Because one is there's so many systems of Chinese medicine. They don't interfere with what you're actually doing. So what you want to do by safety is not do any danger to people by the practice of what you're doing, right? Like not do any harm to people. So let's say you're going to stick a needle into a person. There's certain ways, angles of directing that needle so that it doesn't puncture an organ, and that's considered safe practice. When you have a so to answer your question, no, there's no protocols like that. Like, on adults you can only use this amount of dose of herbs, or on children you can only use this, or you could only do these points on children or adults. There's nothing like that. There's no regulation in that area. And it's good that they don't have that, because who's deciding that? And it becomes very messy. And the reason why they don't have that is because there hasn't actually been, like, they're not just allowing Johnny come lately or any old person to register. You have to have done a course. So that's what you learn in your course. You learn how to practice appropriately, and not just for one one treatment might be appropriate on this patient, but the next patient that comes in with that same disease, that treatment might not be appropriate on them because of their constitution. And that's different in Western medicine. So if a doctor saw 5 patients who have the diagnosis of diabetes, they have a treatment protocol for diabetes, and they're treating diabetes. Chinese medicine practitioners might tell you they're treating your headache, or they tell you they're treating this or that, but that's not what they're treating. They're treating you as a person. And this is the big difference between classical herbs and TCM herbs, particularly, at least with classical herbs, they're admitting that if a patient comes in with a cold or a flu, I'm not treating the cold, I'm not treating the virus, I'm not treating the illness that is there. I'm treating the person, making that person's body, basically trying to restore its homeostasis, trying to restore the function, so that then your body deals with what's wrong with it. So it might be a little bit different to think about things with acupuncture sometimes. Like, like if someone has pain, it's not like, you stick this point in. We might tell that to patients to help them understand it, because some of what happens can be indicative. Like, let's say you have this point here, pericardium 6, which is used for nausea. So what does that point do when you press on that? It descends that rebellious stomach chi. It descends the chi downwards. That's an indication. Like, you press the point, it's doing a function. But your stomach chi should be going down. And if it's not going down, it's going to sit there. And if it sits there, you're going to feel uncomfortable. But if it starts going up, then you're going to have nausea and then possibly vomiting. So even if you think about that point, it's not like this point stops vomiting or this point stops nausea. What the point does is it restores the normal function of the descending action of stomach chi. So if stomach chi descends, you won't have any upward movement of, like, you won't have nausea, you won't have vomiting. so it's a very different way of thinking about how we treat people, or how we treat things. So technically, Chinese medicine actually doesn't treat diseases. It treats people. It helps people be healthier. It's not treating diseases. Yeah. So do you... Oh, okay. Yep. Well, feel free to ask more. Write it again if I'm caught on the wrong tangent. Should have worded it different. Do I mean you guys treat children? Yeah. No, there's no restrictions. I've treated a 1-week-old baby once. You know, it's really about what kind of practice you promote. And I've treated my grandma who was 101. So there you go, 1 week old to 101. I've I've done all the things. Dan says Amazon reviews. Is that mean good? Like, as in they're good? That book is really a book that's before its time. Honestly, I used that when I was studying Chinese medicine back in I don't know whenever it was. Must have been 1990, maybe 1998, or I don't know. I wasn't doing anyway. Sometime then, 1999 probably, like just before I graduated. And it's just full of goodness, like literally, no pun intended. It's a great book, but all that sort of stuff wasn't part of the world then. People didn't think like that, and you were like a weirdo thinking about healing with whole foods. Like, oh, what do you mean packets aren't gonna cut the muscle? Why can't I eat out of packets? When you mentioned the skin condition you had, I remembered how common all that stuff is in children and infants. Yeah, exactly. So yes, acupuncturists, herbalists can, there's no restriction. I have to be careful what I can say here. So I don't want to say, oh, we can treat these conditions, because technically we're not. Now APRA are telling us, unless we have scientific evidence, you can't make a claim, right? So if I say, oh, I can treat herpes, or I can treat this, or I can treat that, that's a claim. And so you can't say that. Even if you say it may be able to help that could be considered a claim as well. So I don't want to make any claims. I don't want to be deregistered or have a problem. But yeah, there's no reason why the system of Chinese medicine is appropriate to all people, and how it works for those different ages is certainly different for sure. And you will learn that in Chinese medicine school. You have a class, like a whole course on pediatrics. You don't have a course on like geriatrics as such, but that does come into it in terms of throughout the course for sure. There's sections where certain illnesses might be focused upon more that are like that. Yep. This one here. To be honest, I haven't read all this book. I buy a lot of books and I don't read them all, just be honest with you. Like, I probably should go back and read this, but I read some of it and I was like, yeah, that's all good. It's, if you're interested in how Chinese medicine is practiced, that's what we're talking about here. If you're interested in what's the system of Chinese medicine like in China now, that's what this will kind of help you understand. Anecdotal kind of stuff. It won't teach you Chinese medicine, like what, so there's pictures and stuff in there of, people having treatments. And just it's all anecdotal. It sort of talks about how they treat different things. It talks about the influence of communism on Chinese medicine. And it's more of a historical text. So he talks about like how Chinese medicine knowledge has kind of I don't want to say evolved, but grown, or changed over the years. So yes, it's if you're interested in the history of Chinese medicine, and it's more of a social sciencey kind of aspect of Chinese medicine. It's not, if you're interested in that, yes, that's. So I don't know whether that's the average person. Most people don't care that much, but it's kind of interesting. You might be able to get it as a PDF book or something online. I don't know. Sometimes you can get those things. Yep. I'll give it a whirl. No, we don't. Well, I don't want to say it like that either, because it makes you. This is the problem. Then it makes you sound like you can't. You're not competent in stuff. And I get that you're joking, just joking, and that's fine. But it's a really big conundrum for us. So I try to promote, like I try to do things like make this channel, educate my patients, educate people. You always kind of need to. People want to know, will you be able to help me? Like they just want to know that. They just literally want to know, I've got a headache. I don't really care about the history of Chinese medicine and the philosophy about it and all this kind of stuff and how you're going to heal my body and make my body stronger so that it doesn't get a headache anymore. They just want the headache to be stopped. So there's a lot of people looking things up online that are like, what can treat my headache? What can treat my insomnia? What can treat my, what can help this or help that? And, natural cures for this, or, then you get that one weird trick videos and all those kinds of things. So yeah, it's a conundrum, and I feel a little bit like Chinese medicine loses out in that space because of those restrictions. So those kinds of people are just that don't know. And thank God we have things like YouTube, and we have places where we can talk more broadly, and in this long form kind of content is great, because then you can explain things well. Whereas back in the day when you just had your Yellow Pages ad, you had kind of 10 words you could say. And so you had to sort of quickly do that. Just because you can't make claims. Yeah, I know. I know you're joking. But if anyone has any ideas about how you can get around that claim situation, feel free to email me. Greetings from LA. Maybe it's really either early in the morning or late at night for you. Can you talk about dark spots on the face cheeks due to the liver channel? I don't know a lot about this stuff. As in, face diagnosis is, yes, it's something about Chinese medicine. I don't have a lot of information about, I can't say that's that's not something I would use in my system of practice to rely upon as the diagnosis. Let me say that, but I'm not saying it's not part of it. So if there's a symptom that arises, or a sign, in this case it's a sign, that might be part of a pattern of disharmony. So this is how a practitioner would kind of go about it, or how you should go about it, instead of just going, oh, I've got these dark spots, I must have a liver channel problem, and now I've got to detox my liver, because you might not need to do that. And what you might do to detox your liver might make you worse, or cause detriment to your body, or unnecessary, right? So what I would kind of how I would go about that is think, well, what if you think that relates to a liver pattern? What your practitioner would do is then ask you questions to make sure that you do have that pattern, you can't just rely on one symptom to that. And Chinese medicine doesn't go about detoxing, really. Like, it's like that stuff I was talking about before about having this like a Yang Ming pattern, like where you use a buncha Sheshin tongue or something. That's a very mild purging formula or a detoxing formula, but we don't use that method very often. We'd often use a harmonizing method, but it's not a purging method. It's not a strong, If you're eating all this kind of food and drink, like alcohol or things like that you think you need to detox from, in Chinese medicine, they would think about it like, not that you need to detox from that, just don't be having that. You shouldn't be eating that stuff. It's not good for you if it's causing you that detriment. Okay. I'm studying Chinese medicine at the moment and love your student series. Oh, good. Okay. I get facial flushing, blushing, and sweating when nervous or attention on me. Hopefully it's not happening now that I'm reading out your question. Would that be heat in the body? Yeah, this is a great question. So what that is it's your own body's yang. So strong yang is contained, weak yang floats out, right? So when it's part of it's like adrenaline, the adrenaline system as well, right, in a Western medicine thing. So, and I just realized your name is Smile Always. That's such a great YouTube name. It's fantastic. So when so it's part of the fight or flight stuff that happens, right? So, I'm sure people know what that is, but like fight or flight is where, you come across something that's, so this person saying, nervous attention on you, but that could, in a in a wild situation, like out in the wilderness, that could mean that you might, need to mobilize your resources to run away or fight this situation. So the fight or flight thing is like your body's getting ready for that, to face that danger. And so maybe your brain is perceiving what's happening with the attention on you as there's possibly some danger that's going to happen. So this nervous system is happening now. I'll just try to talk about it in the Chinese medicine way. So what it means is you don't have as strong a yang as you could have. So weaker yang. Now, if you're the kind of person that goes all the time really easily, like someone sneaks up behind you, like, oh, that's a weak yang as well. And it's like your heart yang, actually. So you're like, if you're a sage-like person, let's say, it's almost like nothing can shake me. I'm strong. I'm calm and I'm smooth and I'm collected. And you know how you have those kinds of people in the world. You might have looked at my series or seen my series on Chinese medicine personality types. So you have like your 5 elements, and there's certain types of people, and there's detriment to those types and there's positive to those types. So sometimes this is just how you're born. It's just how you are. But then circumstantially, things could make this worse or things could make this better. So, some people just seem to be always calm under pressure, and nothing happens. You might not ever be able to get rid of this completely, but you might be able to control it better. Now, you could control it better with things like breathing. So if you look up the Wim Hof method of breathing, Buteyko method of breathing, these kinds of things, it helps you breathe really. I wouldn't suggest you start doing the Wim Hof thing where you're doing that huge breathing at the time, because it's quite intense and that might put the people off you that are around you. But practicing that stuff over time then strengthens your body. And if you breathe with your diaphragm, like pushing your diaphragm down, then you're basically pushing, like your diaphragm's going down, so air has to come into your lungs rather than going like this, right? And so what that does is that slows all this whole process down. And it also focuses the energy down, which is where you want to kind of do that. Now, you could see a herbalist or an acupuncturist who might be able to help kind of strengthen your yang. And you certainly wouldn't need like heat clearing. Like this is, it looks like a heat symptoms, but it's not heat. It's your own body's yang. That's what it is. It's not like you need to take a yin chao san or some kind of heat clearing thing and clear off that heat. You need to make your body stronger so that then it contains that. So when this happens, because it's going to happen, people come up to you, they put attention on you. And then you that response could be slowed down, and then you maybe wouldn't sweat as much. You wouldn't get as flushed as much. Like sometimes people might have things that in their life that might make this worse. So if you had caffeine, that might even make all this worse, or alcohol might even make all this worse, or that kind of stuff. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. Yeah, that's me. You jump from the fright. So that's what we call in Chinese medicine a heart and kidney not communicating situation. So your sleep might not be so great in that scenario as well. So what we would do is a herbalist would be able to kind of give you herbs that would kind of anchor that yang and root that yang. So if people are wanting, don't put too much personal information, if it's your real name and all that stuff on YouTube. Like, I'm not saying you need to do all that. I'm happy for you to ask your questions, but just be aware of that stuff. But you can always send me an email at the email for this one is chinesemedicinepodcast@gmail.com. That's a good one to send it to. And if you send me your address, not your address, your suburb, your area that you live in, or your country. If I know herbalists in those areas, I can forward you their details, because there's people in ICAAM, that's the style of Chinese medicine that I practice, that could see people, in your, like, they'll take it. I can refer you to them. That's what I'm trying to say. Yep. Just going to have a sip of water. Got another question here that we'll go to. Right. Okay, we've done that one. Ashley, now another one. I'm currently being treated for wind heat. Oh, the same person. I get very dry mouth. Oh, very cold fingers and toes. Right. So what that means is the very cold toes and fingers means that it's probably a blood deficiency, kind of yang deficiency problem. So there's two things that cold hands and feet or cold fingers and toes can be in Chinese medicine. One, a qi stagnation from deficiency. So it means energy can't move blood to the extremities as best as it should do. And so it keeps the blood here because your organs are the most important for your body, right? So let's say you went out in the, cold weather. That's why you get frostbite. You don't get frostbite on your torso, right? In your liver or some organ. You get frostbite on your extremities. Like your body might sacrifice just losing a finger or a toe so that it can keep the rest of you going. And it's kind of like a little mild version of that in a way. Like your body's saying there's insufficient energy, like qi, to move the blood to those areas, or it's just what we call a blood deficiency. So when you have deficient blood, it means there's not enough yang in the blood, not enough warmth in the blood, because blood's warm, right? So when you're around an alive person, their blood's warm. A dead person, their blood's cold because there's no yang, right? So yang is the life, yang is the force. So what's happening in this case is either it's blood deficiency, and so you'll get really cold. And often with blood deficiency, not always, but very commonly, the person doesn't notice it as much. Like they don't go, oh, my hands are cold. Their partners notice it. They're just like, oh, my hands are always cold. Like I'll feel, usually when I feel patients' pulses, you'll feel their hands. So you're sort of going to feel their pulse. And as you do that, you're like, oh, your hands are warm or your hands are cold or it's normal. So if I mention that to people with this blood deficiency pattern, often they'll be like, oh, I don't really notice that. Or, oh, are they? They might be freezing cold. And they don't sit there going, oh, my hands are cold, my hands are cold. So that's what that can mean. That's part of it. So yeah. There's a very big difference in TCM, right, traditional Chinese medicine, and classical Chinese medicine in terms of how we treat these kinds of things. So like you said, wind heat for psoriasis. And like I don't want to have a go at TCM too much because it's so great. And if I didn't learn it, I never would have learned classical Chinese medicine. But it's just a different way of treating it. So if I had a patient with psoriasis in the TCM days, I would have done a wind heat sort of treatment. And sometimes those things can actually help, and they do help. And then so the patients are happy because, well, my symptoms are less, I feel good. It's almost like the antibiotics of Chinese medicine, like these wind heat treating cooling herbs. Like there's some around here somewhere because like Jinyanhua is one of those herbs, right? And we do use this in classical Chinese medicine, but just not as often. So when I was saying that story about how I had the hives thing, what it was like the bed bugs reaction or whatever, like my skin was horrible. Could probably find a photo and show you. It's terrible. But anyway, it was so painful, like as in it was just itchy and horrible. I used that Sheshin tongue, but I also added some cooling herbs in there, which is part of what we do in our the system of herbs that I use. And Jinyanhua is kind of one of those herbs. But you can't live on that formula. Like you can't take that all the time because it's detrimental to your body to be having all this cooling stuff. Like, so what I'm saying is sometimes there's a time for that. There's a need for that. But then you have to think, well, why is this skin getting dry? Like in this psoriasis kind of situation, why is your skin getting dry? If you've got really cold hands, probably blood isn't nourishing the skin. And this will blow the minds of some TCM people listening to this, but commonly this kind of formula might be like a Dangui Suni tongue, which is a very, very, very warm formula. So you've gone from these freezing cold cooling herbs to clear this heat. So I've had some patients with what in TCM would look like extreme heat, and then they go onto like a warming formula that I would give them. And, that treats it from a different way. It's like warming their blood so that their blood's warm. And then if your blood's warm enough, like not over warm, just how it should be, then it's able to nourish the skin and it's your body's inhospitable to that situation of the psoriasis. That's how classical Chinese medicine thinks about things. That's how we think about it. Yep. So I am doing online consultations as well. So some people asked me that last year in the pandemic time because I was not doing that at all. But I've had quite a few patients doing that, and it's been quite good to help people. So if you've got a question that's kind of more than what we can talk about here, and you want actual herbs prescribed to you or something like that, then that's what I do. And we can either ship the herbs over from Australia or ship them or help you get them locally. Sometimes depends on what country you live in. Some people just want to talk about their diet therapy and things like that, but just on a more personal basis and that kind of stuff. So ultimately, with this kind of situation, with this one, you're saying, Ashley, a herbalist like me would go by your pulse. That's how it would be very clear from your pulse whether it was Qi deficiency or blood deficiency. It would be pretty obvious. But without the pulse, then we would go by symptoms. So sometimes I can't see patients to touch them anymore because of the virus. Like, I have tons of patients now that can't come into the clinic because of the virus. If they've got cold or flu symptoms, we're kind of telling them to stay away so that, like, unless they had a coronavirus test and they know they don't have coronavirus, it's variable because in Perth, where I live, we've had very, very, very little community spread, and we've only had a lockdown like 2 or 3 times the whole time. And it's only been for like 4 days or a week or something. We've never had a full lockdown for like more than 4 days, actually, more than 4 or 5 days. So it's been lovely to be able to still see patients in person, but probably the last year and a half, I've had to kind of adapt away from just relying on that pulse, which is, it's good that you can rely on it because it means you know what you're doing a bit more than if you didn't rely on it. But then if you don't have that, there are other ways to kind of think about things with your symptoms. So yeah, if other people have a question, now's the time to ask it. We might wrap things up otherwise, but I'm happy to be on here for a little bit longer. Just had a bit of a quiet afternoon, so I thought I'd jump on the stream and see if people wanted to talk about Chinese medicine. It's been lovely to hear lots of people's questions and things like that. So yeah, I'll put the link to what email will we do? Chinese medicine. Not hashtag, at Gmail. So I'll put my email there, and that's for people that want to either find out a practitioner nearby them or just want to ask or inquire about the online consultations. You can do that through there as well. What's the difference between classical and TCM? Okay, so there's a couple of big differences. I'm just going to get that other link for you. There we go. There's a couple of big differences. There's the link to my online consultation thingamo. So one is the way that we treat things. So in classical Chinese medicine, the types. Oh, we've got another question. We've got another question there. That's fine. We'll definitely get to those for sure. In classical Chinese medicine, we use a lot more warmer herbs than in TCM. So classical Chinese medicine is like the foundational parts of Chinese medicine. So it's medicine, herbal medicine, and acupuncture treatments that are kind of used in the Han Dynasty. So you had the Neijing, the Huangdi Neijing text that was around already. And then you had the Zhang Zhongjing's texts, so the Shanghan Luan, the Jingui Yalue. And I'm not really, I know about, but I don't practice classical acupuncture. So it's using Neijing acupuncture, basically, like Neijing texts. I don't want to sort of say the wrong thing, get myself into trouble, but that's basically what it's So what happened with Chinese medicine is over the years, things changed, right? People come and go, and China changed in terms of it got hotter and not as cold, and people weren't as familiar with using these warmer herbs, and they probably are more. It's more easy to make people worse than with TCM. You have to be more skilled at it to get it right. Right, people can have more flare-ups and things like that from herbs if they're not prescribed properly. So you really need to see a qualified practitioner who's trained within that style. And it's something that has only become available for people to learn, I would say, because some texts there were these tombs that were kind of dug up. I'm not exactly sure when, but I think in the 80s or something like that, where they'd found pieces of the Shanghanlun that were missing and translations and things like that. And so it's not always been a system that's been accessible. And I think also people haven't fully understood the effects of communism on Chinese medicine. So classical Chinese medicine really fully embraces the idea of treating the function of the body. Now, that's what I was taught in TCM. They didn't use that word function, but they said, oh, you're not treating diseases, you treat people. Oh, you're helping people, helping their body heal itself. And I was like, that makes sense. That's what I want to do. I want to help the body heal itself. But it was never properly, well, not properly, but it was never as articulately explained. And in first year Chinese medicine school, you kind of think about all these concepts, yin yang and the 5 elements. You think about these ideas of how does the body function and all that kind of stuff. And then by a third year, the treatments that you're using are not like that example with that wind heat case that we were just talking about. It's just it's not really raising the body's function to clear off wind heat all the time. Like how did that heat get there? What is that heat? In classical Chinese medicine, more often than not always, but more often, it's your body's own yang coming to the area to warm it, to get rid of it, to do something about it. Now, it doesn't mean that we never use heat clearing herbs. No. So take the example of the skin thing that I said that I had. It's a very acute situation. That heat that you're seeing it's a heating up of your body's system, but it's not considered an external heat that's kind of come into your body. Whereas TCM thinks like that. It thinks, oh, this external heat's come in, and so therefore we got to attack it. We've got to attack it, right? So there's a lot of this attacking the heat and attacking those things. Whereas in classical Chinese medicine, it's not about attacking at all. It's about your body attacks it, your body fights it, but we don't give you herbs to kind of attack it and fight it. And so that's why the herbs are warmer, because your body's warm. Your body likes warmness. And how does it die? How do you die? You die from a lack of warmth. As you die, you get colder, and you get shriveled up, and you get drier, and your body's yang is declining. So it's the classical Chinese medicine system is thinking about preserving that yang and not wasting that yang. And that's part of the main philosophy of like longevity practices is all about that. And they might call it qi or jing, but it's also yang. It's also preserving that and keeping that, not wasting it. So that's still a big part of, like, if you read these kind of books that I constantly mention, where are they? Oh, it's somewhere here. The Bob Flores book. I don't know, I had it the other day. It's gone now. Where is it? Oh, there it is. This kind of thing, like, this is not a classical Chinese medicine book, but the idea of not wasting yang by eating more warm foods and making sure your spleen and stomach are working properly, and this arisal of the clear and all that, that's in line with that kind of thinking. It's promoting that. It's all good. Yep. So can you talk about what of channel palpation as a main tool? Yeah, sure. So within acupuncture, you have points, right? Acupuncture points. But the points are on channels. They're on pathways. So when I was teaching acupuncture, like when I was learning it, let's say as a student and teaching first year students, you're taught, like, here's a point and you need to know this exact point. And if you're not exactly on this point, then you're wrong, because this is the exact spot where it is, right? And so usually within a certain radius. But those points lie on channels. And so it's more appropriate to be, well, firstly, you do need to know the points, right? You need to know the directions of needling and all that kind of stuff, because that helps you understand the safety. But you need to know the channels where those points are on, so that you might have an idea, okay, we want to use this area. Actually, acupuncture points are kind of like when it says, oh, you need to use Hergu, or you need to use this or that. It's pointing you in the direction of an area of the body. And then as you're palpating it, so it's hard to show you just on myself, but we'll just sort of try to do that. I'm just looking at myself in the, the video camera so I can make sure you can see me. So what will we do? So I mean, if it was let's say a patient had a sore shoulder, right? I'll try to do it here so you can see. So this is your large intestine channel right down here. So you kind of have 2 points at either side of your like your acromion process is kind of here, and you've got sort of this area. And so what you would do is you would sort of think, okay, I want to find the most sore point on that channel, so to needle that. And it might not be because, like, let's say I had a knee pain and you're using the opposite area, and so you would say, well, your knee's sore. It's hard to show you without showing you, but on that outside, if the outside, the lateral side of your knee is sore, let's say around gallbladder stomach 36 or gallbladder 34, you're probably going to have a sore point kind of here on the outside here, right? So your Sanjiao and your gallbladder channel are mirrored channels or matching channels, and so you kind of, would palpate sort of around that outside of your shoulder. Is that what you want to talk about? Does that answer your question? Yeah, to be honest, if I enroll in TCM, I won't do it without learning ICAM. Yeah, I know. I just I kind of promote them a lot because it's changed my life. Like, it's really good. And I don't know if anything. I can't. There are some really good other systems, and if you want to do acupuncture, you could do the Neijing acupuncture course with David White. That's a good one to do. So that he does practice Chinese herbs, but his main practice is in acupuncture. Yeah, it's a big part of. It's a bummer that there isn't an undergraduate school doing classical Chinese medicine. That's a bummer. Yep. Yeah. So channel palpation is much more in line with classical styles too. There's a good article that was out in the. It was an article by David White, actually. I'll just see if I can find it. I think it was in the Journal of Chinese Medicine, JCM. So I don't know if you're a student now, and you can look up those things you can get a copy of those things, but I think it was the Journal of Chinese Medicine. I'll just put it in the notes here. He did an article of what's the sun, pulse diagnosis for something about channel palpation and pulse diagnosis or something like that. See if I can find it here. Renying Sun Cole pulse diagnosis, that's what it's called. He does have a course on it, but it's not. I think the articles. I mean, I've done some of his courses, but I haven't done the whole thing. Again, it's time. It's time for me as well. All right. Yeah. Why are you scared of studying herbs? Herbs are the best thing ever. It's so great. Yeah. But if you're drawn to the channel stuff, like it's all interrelated. And actually, proper Chinese, it's good to pick one, right? Is what I'm saying. So what they teach now is often these combined courses together, herbs and acupuncture together. And I'm not poo-pooing that, because that's what I did and that's what I practice, right? I do both those things. But even my teacher says it's hard to be good at one thing. Like acupuncture is a whole different thing, and herbs is a whole different thing. And that's why I've kind of just gone more to the herbs. And my kind of special area has always been understanding the functionality of Chinese medicine, being able to explain that well. That's why I do a lot of teaching and like that kind of stuff. And the diet therapy, which is kind of has made even more sense with the herbs, right? Because you're thinking of a substance that you're putting in your body, a flavor, a function, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. What are the quickest ways to build up? This will be the last question. The cutoff time. The final time. I like doing these streams, but it takes a while for people to come in on them, and then people start flooding their questions in, and which is great. I need to go and have some lunch because I've got to go for it. I've got to go out in a bit. What are the quickest ways to build up blood through your lifestyle or daily habits? Thanks, Chloe. So I did a video on this of just food. So there's one video about foods for vegans and foods for blood deficiency. The quickest ways would be, don't be a vegan or a vegetarian. If you are, it's okay. There's still ways. So you maybe can say that if you are or not, then thank you for providing the Worldwide Chinese Medicine Hotline. Yeah, you will have to dedicate to one. So if you're not a vegan or a vegetarian, then high quality meats and bone broth would be the best way, or on a regular basis. So go to a butcher, find a butcher that you trust, because this would be the cheapest way as well. You don't have to eat a lot of meat, and you make the bone broth. The first time you make it, the first couple of times you make it, be a bit gross. Like I wasn't happy making it. I used to be a vegetarian for 9 years, and for the first 2 years of eating meat, like when I stopped being a vegetarian, I couldn't cook a steak. I couldn't touch meat. I couldn't have it in my fridge. It was just something that just took me ages to kind of get to that point. Even sometimes I use gloves when I touch meat now, right? Yeah, smile always. It's 10 p.m. in LA here. Yeah, well, it's 1 p.m. here. It's 1:20 p.m. So yeah, I'm hungry. And you love meat. Okay, good. Because a lot of people get to being blood deficient through veganism and vegetarianism. So yeah. Look, I started this stream saying, like, the world, there's a lot of troubles in the world with, I've just seen a couple of videos recently where people saying, oh, we're going to have food shortages and things like that. So bone broths is a good way you can make bone broth, you can freeze it if you're worried about having high quality foods in the long term and worried about all that. I'd be making up some bone broths and keeping them in the freezer. They can last quite a long time. Like I've had one in the freezer that I had in there for a year. It was still all right. Even in the fridge, they can last a long time. The fat kind of sits on top, kind of seals up the container a bit. It's up to you. I still remember you had a fridge in your bedroom. Yeah, because when I was a vegetarian, I couldn't stomach. I definitely didn't want the meat. My mum would buy this meat that would drip down to the vegetables sometimes. Like a little bit of meat just might drip down. I was like, I'm not having that. But I mean, even after I decided I'd eat meat, this is in my own house after I moved out from my parents. When I was a meat eater, I couldn't cook the meat. I didn't know how to cook it. And I just used to go to a restaurant and order a steak, and I'd feel really good. And then, yeah, so I just used to get my steaks at the restaurants. But now I love cooking my own steaks and things like that. So I get it can be a bit annoying to make the bone broth the first time you do it. But yeah, go to a good quality butcher. It's actually not expensive. My butcher's sells me a big bag of bones, which I could probably get a bit less because sometimes I feel like I have to put 2 slow cookers on to make it. But then that will give you heaps of stuff, heaps of bone broth to use. And you can put it in the freezer in little cups. So that's one thing you could do. So royal jelly can also be used. I'll say it slower because my Aussie accent. Royal jelly is also a blood tonic food. And you can buy those in these little tubes, these little vial kind of things, and you can drink that. I used to have a lot of that when I was a vegetarian. Placenta is another thing. I've seen that at the Chinese food shop, sheep placenta. Just going full ball now. Most people wouldn't eat this, but I've had that as well. And they put some sugar in it, so it sort of like coats the flavor away. I don't know what placenta really tastes like, but these are the most strongest blood tonic kind of foods, right? There's another blood tonic that's good, and I'll show you this. This is really interesting. I'm wearing my jeans today. I've got my professional top half on. This is a herb called shangdi. Now, most people, when they see shangdi, or I should say maybe shudi is a herb called Rama. I'm just looking for the other one. Oh, but where are you? Here we go. So this is shangdi and this is shudi, right? How you would normally buy them. So shudi, you can see, is a little, where are we? A little bit darker, and that one's a little bit not as dark. So this is supposedly fresh Romania, and that's the other one. Now, it's a vegetarian product. It's a thing. This is my friend's company, Empirical Health. This is their shangdi. I'll put something in my hand and put it up there. So it's not dark at all, right? See that? And when you cook this with, you can soak it. And it tastes a bit like a parsnip. So I've used this with my students in a class once, and we did like different cookings with herbs and stuff. This is the first time in the world like that you can get this shangdi. So this is from a company in Australia called Empirical Health. And this brand is Spring Wind. So if you're in the US, you might be able to get it from Spring Wind, buy them, because he's like the distributor for the brand is Spring Wind. So that if you're in Australia, you can probably get it from there, or you can ask your herbalist or whatever, because he's starting to sell some stuff over the counter or whatever. What's that other thing? Anyway, it's been knocked down. So yeah, so you can have some blood tonic herbs in your foods if you want. It might be a little bit it might be a little bit what do you call it, like sorry, I was just reading a comment there when I was saying it might not be easy. You said what's the quickest way to build, as in you mean quickest ways in time saving ways, or quickest way for you as in I'll do whatever it takes but the shortest amount of time. So one thing would be to stop bleeding. So if you've got a bleeding problem, you need to stop the bleeding, right? So if you've got blood leaking out, you've got really heavy periods or things like that, then you would need to go to a practitioner and get them to help you stop that. Then you're using your diet, and you could maybe use moxibustion to warm. So you want to warm blood. You can get the moxibox. You can put that onto your belly. Some practitioners will sell you one of those, or you can buy them online. You need to be trained how to use a moxibox properly, because you can burn yourself with moxa, right? But that's a possibility of being able to use moxa to kind of warm the yang, right, to underneath, under your belly button. So Ren 6, Ren 4, those kind of points. Quickest way to build blood, right? So firstly, not having cold foods and all that sort of stuff. So just having warm, cooked and moist foods, not cold, dry and raw, eating regular meals, all that sort of stuff. So what that does is it kind of stops your spleen and stomach overworking, right? So it helps your spleen and stomach work properly, nourishes them. Right. Never going to get out of here. There's so many questions being asked now. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure about the sustainability for the bees either. But when I was a vegan, not a vegan, when I was a vegetarian, I was more important than the bees. Like, sometimes you've got to make that call, and I wasn't going to be eating meat. So, yeah. Yeah, good. It's a big part of cooking. I mean, it makes your food taste delicious, by the way, as well. And the other thing you could try, Chloe, with the meat thing, and the tonifying blood. So I didn't mention the vegetables, but any vegetables that are um, purple and black, dark colored, so things like your blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, um, root vegetables in general will tonify your spleen and stomach. So turnip and parsnip and all that, but beetroot is particularly good for blood because it's red and it's so juicy, and that's a really good one. So you could have things like beetroot. I made a thing the other day. I'll see if I can put it, because I was going to put these clips right on my page the other day. Let's see if we can add this here. Share. No, I can't. Oops. I'm just going to try to put this photo in here. Can I do that? No, I can't do that. I was going to try to add a photo because I made these kind of foods for my students. So, purple cabbage is in the photo, and purple carrots, and purple onion. So you could use those kinds of things in there. Yep. Okay. So hopefully that's useful and helpful. Physical exercise. So you have to be careful with blood. There's a saying in classical Chinese medicine that says never sweat a blood deficient patient. So make sure you are blood deficient before you kind of, I'm not sure, I'm just taking your word for it. So I'm not saying you're lying, but sometimes people say, oh, you have blood deficiency, and you don't actually have that pattern. But technically you shouldn't be sweating, because sweat is like a lesser form of blood. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't ever sweat, as in what we mean is don't sweat a blood deficient patient. We mean we wouldn't give you ginger in the formulas. Like in true blood deficiency, you don't have ginger in there. Like in that bait. Now you can have permutations of patterns. And when we use some herbs that like are pungent and can make you sweat, there's something in there to help contain that sweat, so that kind of corrects a moistening effect. So in general, you shouldn't have, if you're a blood deficient, you shouldn't have tons and tons of pungent stuff. So don't have curries that make you sweat and that sort of stuff. I think in your diet, you could still have ginger to warm, but just be careful that you're not sweating from it, right? It's about the quantity, because in a herbs formula, you're having it every day. It's a bigger quantity. You'd have like 9 grams a day. Like that's a whole knob of ginger every time you have a formula. Whereas in your food, a whole knob of ginger would feed a whole family and maybe for a few meals even, let's say. So I'm not saying you can't cook with ginger. Yes, make a purple soup. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. So with your exercise, you want to keep your body moving. So stretching and yoga, definitely not the sweaty yoga, the Bikram yoga or any of that sort of stuff, but like walking, things that keep your mind, like, keep your body moving. And if you are going to have a sweating, make sure you stop sweating. The detriment of sweating is if you go for an exercise and you come home and you don't stop sweating, like you don't have a cold shower and stop that sweating, then you continuously sweat through the day because you've built up that sweat. And sometimes people who are deficient can't stop sweating, so they just they can go into more detriment just because they've started that process off. So saunas and things like that, I wouldn't advise those for people who are blood deficient. And certainly really strenuous, heavy exercise. So if you're like trying to get pregnant, let's say, even most GPs and doctors and whatever will say don't do strenuous exercise. Just if you're even trying to get pregnant, like don't do CrossFit or those kinds of things. Because so in a Chinese medicine sense, we think, well, you're causing that detriment to blood. You want to keep you want to tonify blood as much as possible, but you're also just straining your body physically, exerting it like way a lot, right? Okay, I'm glad you love the channel. Thank you. Yes, so if you haven't subscribed, make sure people subscribe. I haven't even mentioned that yet. So thanks everyone for your questions, and I've done a few more than I said I would do. I've got to go and have lunch now because I've got to go out shortly. So thanks everyone. I will maybe take for neuropathy in the feet. That's probably a big question, and probably depends on. I can't really answer that without knowing what the Chinese medicine diagnosis is. So it's because we don't treat illnesses like that. So it would depend on. I could talk about what kind of Chinese medicine patterns could be seen in neuropathy. And certainly it could be what we're just talking about. Blood deficiencies could be part of it. If you're on the stream before or after I finish this, you go back and watch the replay. We're talking about qi not moving blood. So qi stagnation from deficiency that can cause, in Chinese medicine, we think of it as like cold hands and feet, but that can also cause like a lack of function there, right? Coldness, a lack of feeling, like pain, and those kind of things that are sometimes, not always, associated with the neuropathy. So yeah, thanks everyone. No worries. Have a great day. I'm going to close this before there's any more questions come. But it's been great to chat to everyone, and I hope you have a great weekend. Have a great time if you're in Sydney and Melbourne. I'm sorry about what's going on there. It must be hard staying at home and just all that stuff. So I hope you're doing well and enjoy your life with Chinese medicine. Make some nice warming soups if you're in Australia. It's winter time here, and if it's summertime, it's probably time for a lighter kind of meal, salad and some cooked foods with it, maybe some steak and salad, or some veggies and salad, something like that. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye.